always such a pleasure to come here, and I think this is my fourth or fifth time, and I have been interacting with the Ed right from the early days of creation. I can tell you that all these interactions by coming here or writing for Ed have really affected my own scientific thinking and career, and how we were able to incorporate a lot of ideas from Hormesis field into practice. I'm primarily an aging researcher, both physically and intellectually. The field of biogerontology, the biological understanding of aging. And we think that aging research has gained so much from this way of thinking that we are actually one of the flag carriers of Hormesis in the field of health and biomedicine. Before I talk a little bit in detail about how Hormesis is useful and being used for healthy aging, I'm going to go through a little bit of background on aging, that why we think it is, because to the best of my knowledge, there are not many of you who work directly in the field of aging. Although a lot of you work indirectly, you may or may not admit it that you are gerontologists, but when you work with Alzheimer, Parkinson, any other cardiovascular problems which happen with age, so you are dealing with the process of aging. So just to give a little nutshell, that where do we come from? So understanding aging from a biogerontological perspective, that first of all, just to define aging, that aging is not happening from birth. Aging is that period when these things happen. That is a progressive loss of ability to function independently. It increases, it's a progressive increase in frailty, it's an increase in the chances of emergence of one or more diseases, and eventual death. Yeah? So that is how we would like to define aging in biological context. And it happens after the essential lifespan. Now this may be already a new term for you, that what is this essential lifespan? Essential lifespan is the lifespan needed by evolution in order to assure the continuity of generations. Each species has to have certain kind of evolutionary restraints, which also includes how much time is needed to grow, develop, mature, and reproduce, so that the species continues. That's the purpose of life in biology, from Darwinian evolutionary theory point of view. So that period of time which a species needs for that purpose is called essential lifespan. Sometimes some people use the term warranty period also. J. Olshansky here in America uses that. But essential lifespan is the common term becoming popular more and more to define what is life. So if you live longer than your species' essential lifespan, that is when aging sets in. That's one understanding from biogerontology. Aging doesn't start from birth. It doesn't start at age 20 for human beings. It doesn't start from, say, at the time of reproduction. Aging starts if a species lives longer, or an individual of a species lives longer than its essential lifespan, aging sets in. For Drosophila, for example, essential lifespan is around 7 days in nature. But in the laboratory, Drosophila lives for a month, 2 months, 3 months, depending upon experimental conditions. In the same way, the essential lifespan for our species, Homo sapiens, is around 45 years. That is what nature needs, or evolution needs, for Homo sapiens as a species. But due to our own achievements, we have been able to live double or even triple. The oldest person alive died 117 years and 5 months, just 3 or 4 days ago. Now the next one is also 117. The world record is about 122. So if you live longer than your species' essential lifespan, aging sets in. And once it sets in, it happens in every part of the body. There is nothing in biology or in the biological system which does not age. And I have defined aging already: progressive failure of functionality and the frailty increase and all those definitions. But the beauty here is that no two individuals become old exactly in the same way. No two parts of the body become old in the same way. The way brain becomes old is not the way the bones will become old. No two systems become old in the same way. The nervous system goes through a different route of aging than, say, the skeletal system. You keep going down to the cell level. No two cells become old in the same way. Even within the cell, no two molecules become old in the same way. So this is the complexity of the aging. When there are 10 million molecules of, say, actin in a cell, no two maybe molecules may have accumulated the same kind of damage. So aging is very, very individualistic all the way down to molecular level. And that raises a big issue and big question and challenge for aging scientists. Are we going to make single magic pills which will work on every system and every body at all the times? It immediately tells, no, those kind of approaches or promises are either false, deliberately, or ignorantly. So aging is very differential. Yes, some of us can carry on. Yeah, here is the Japanese guy, Mr. Miyazaki, at 105 years, who also ran 100-meter sprint and makes the same pose as Usain Bolt. But just notice the time difference. Usain does it in 9.58 seconds, and Hidarachi did it in 42.22 seconds. Example of the best healthy aging person. There may not be anybody else fitter than him in the whole world, but he's 4 times slower. Even in the absence of all diseases, any known things, other things, this is what aging is all about. Some of us can, like this, but most of us will never be able to do that. And that is what the aging question needs. And the important thing to understand, the second important thing is that this happens without any program being evolved in nature. Evolution has not created gerontogenes, the genes to cause aging. Aging happens because evolution did not give us a damn to survive for so long. It creates systems to keep us alive for about essential lifespan. And those are called longevity assurance genes. Genes to assure longevity, genes to maintain life, to maintain health for that much period. And the beauty is that after that period, then it hasn't put any time bombs also to kill us. There are no gerontogenes which measure time and cause things to go wrong. Things will go wrong, and I will mention that very briefly, how and why. Things do go wrong, and they will go wrong, but not because there is an enemy sitting in the body which is doing it, that there is a gerontogene which is causing my aging or measuring my time. Because that, again, will make life easier. If you have an enemy doing something, at least in theory, you can send a missile to neutralize the enemy. But if there is no enemy in the body, evolution has not created enemies in the body, it works on survival mechanisms, then how do you deal with such an issue? We know aging will happen, and aging happens in tremendously painful way for majority of us, with long periods of suffering and clinical dependence and all that. So how do you handle that issue? So an aging is the progressive failure of homeodynamic space. Now, I'm just introducing various buzzwords or words which have come up in the last 50 years in biogerontology, but giving you a little taste of all these concepts. Essential lifespan, no gerontogenes. Aging is the shrinkage of the homeodynamic space. But what is homeodynamic space? Homeodynamic space is our ability to live, to survive, to adapt. And again, I will give a little bit of detail on that next. Homeodynamic space is the property which is the result of this survival as a constant struggle. What is needed for survival is also the cause of its demise. Oxygen metabolites, food, and basic biochemistry. This is what keeps us alive, and this is what kills us sooner or later. Oxygen is the biggest damage producer in the body. You all know about reactive oxygen species and free radicals. Every time you eat food, how much damage glucose and its metabolites are doing. Every time any biochemical reaction is happening, right from DNA duplication to protein synthesis or turnover, how many mistakes are being made. Yeah? It's almost a wonder that we survive, but we survive because we have a whole range of maintenance and repair mechanisms. That's what evolution worked on, survival mechanisms. These are some examples at the lowest level. You need very complex genomic stability processes, DNA repair and maintenance, epigenomic stability, protein stability. Of course, each pathway here is run by hundreds of genes. So when I said genes are not involved in aging, yes, they are not involved in causing aging, but genes are involved in keeping us alive. So longevity assurance processes. So this is the struggle between damage occurrence and damage prevention, removal, and repair. And if that happens, that is what then we call the kind of our homeodynamic ability. Often in biology, we still keep using the word homeostatic, which is one of the most, actually, I should say, the wrong word to use for living systems. Living systems are never static. We all talk about dynamic nature. Everything is dynamic all the way through my molecular level to the higher level. But then we use the term homeostasis as if that's what body is trying to maintain. Body is never homeostatic. Every day we are the same, but we are different, and that's why it's a homeodynamic. A child is born with certain minimal level of homeodynamics, without which it won't survive, but it has a great large area of red area for the vulnerability zone. So during growth, development, maturation, that is when this homeodynamics become better and better. And at the peak youth level, this is what we call the peak of that, say, health of the youth. And of course, things can go wrong at any age. Now, what are the three characteristics of homeodynamics? Three characteristics of homeodynamics are stress response, damage control, and continuous remodeling. And now you can start getting a little cue how this is going towards hormesis soon. These are the three major characteristics of a living system without which it cannot survive. Its ability to respond to internal and external sources of stress. Every time something challenges it, it has to respond by hundreds of pathways. We'll again come to that very briefly. It must control the damage occurring either by prevention or by removal or by repair. And that leads to continuous remodeling. All the time bodies, that's again a dynamic process. Immune system is the best example for the continuous remodeling and adaptation. This is what is life, basically. If you want to define a living system, it's defined through its homeodynamic space. And as I already mentioned, aging is the shrinkage of the homeodynamic space. During the period of survival beyond essential lifespan, these things are allowed to go wrong. They become less efficient. As a result, the red zone has now become very large, and the chances of emergence of one or more diseases is very high. Of course, we can work at one disease at a time, the way most of the biomedical research is done, and that's where most of the grant system functions, by giving money to specific problem. Alzheimer, if I write the word Alzheimer in my grant, I get all the money. But if I write aging, I don't get money. And we forget that aging is the common reason for all these diseases. That's why the traditional disease treatment approaches are not working in aging diseases. What's the cause of Alzheimer? People say, okay, amyloid beta, and you try to remove it, nothing happens. Yeah? Or what's the cause of osteoporosis? What's the cause of Parkinson? What's the cause of diabetes 2? These are conditions which have happened, and we don't know how to approach them. We have to approach them from aging point of view. Why this shrinkage of the homeodynamic space is happening? Can we keep this homeodynamic space a little better, or slow down its shrinkage to some extent, which will make the difference in the emergence and the consequences of those diseases? And why this shrinkage happens? In the last 30 years, molecular biologists have given a lot of data that the most common things which correlate is the accumulation of damage. This is what is the major association. Damage of every type which we can measure, so is increasing, including in the systems which repair the damage. Yeah, proteasome, which takes care of abnormal protein, that's becoming damaged itself. So the repair systems, the longevity assurance processes, they themselves are becoming damaged. And there is so much data on every type of damage which we can measure with our whatever technology is available. And this is what is then making us think about aging and health in a different way. And that is, it may be wishful thinking on my part, or I want this to happen, that a major shift is happening. At least that is what happened in my own research career. From this single target-oriented questions to holistic questions, holistic with a W, in order to separate from the hocus pocus holistic, which is everybody calls themselves holistic. But scientific holism means dealing with the dynamic total processes. And what is that? That instead of enemy-oriented anti-aging approach, which is very prevalent, that's what industry sells us, anti-aging this, anti-aging that. We need to understand how to strengthen homeodynamic processes, how to maintain homeodynamic space, how to maintain health. And as James already mentioned, one of the most difficult things is to define actually health. I may or may not go into that depending upon the time we have today. So that is where it is in this background of aging where hormesis comes in picture. Can hormesis do something about strengthening the homeodynamics, maintaining the homeodynamic space? So hormesis is based on this view that deliberately and repeatedly challenging the biological systems can stimulate compensatory, adaptive, and reparative processes, as shown in this graph kind of a representation. That we all talk about stress as bad, bad, bad. Yes, it is bad when it's continuous and severe and uncontrolled and unchosen one. But stress at the lower level is the one which strengthens homeodynamics, and that's basically the graph for how we define hormesis, the biphasic dose response. At low level, you have strengthening of your survival abilities, and at higher level, it can be the same things can be very damaging. And that's what during these last 15 years of these conferences, etc., where Ed took the initiative to ask almost 50 or 60 people around the world to then formalize the terminology for what are we doing. Yeah? So when we talk about hormesis in aging, what we are basically concentrating is in the middle one, the non-conditioning and repetitive, the physiological hormesis. Now these terms have also evolved during these congresses. So phenomenon is hormesis. Then I started using the term hormetin for any condition which induces hormesis. That any condition which induces hormesis, we can call it hormetin for the sake of keeping our focus, and maybe the science of hormesis can be called hormetics if we want to call it anything else. So in our own labs, in the last now almost 20 years, we have been trying to test this hypothesis or this idea that how to expose biological systems to different types of stresses so that we can strengthen their homeodynamics. And we have worked on aging and lifespan, wound healing, differentiation, angiogenesis, tolerance and robustness and resilience. That's the latest area, how to test these concepts. Mostly my work has been done with the human cell culture system, which when you grow normal human cells in culture, they have a limited lifespan, the Hayflick phenomenon, which is the cellular aging ending with the replicative senescence. And we have used various types of stressors. And just some examples, because almost all these papers are all published. This was one of the earliest studies even before I met Ed. That's when I had come somehow independently. I think that was what drew his attention, and he invited me in 1998 or 1999 to talk more about the work. So that is that if I give a mild heat shock to human cells in culture, normally, oh, that was not the aim. Where is the light? Normally, this Hayflick system, skin fibroblasts in culture, when they're young, they behave like this, and progressively they become old. It takes about a year to do that. But if I expose them to 41 degree for 1 hour, 41 degrees Celsius, not the American 41, for 1 hour, 2 times a week. So that means during their lifetime, they're getting almost about 200 time exposure. Even an untrained eye can see that at the end stage, these cells are nothing old like this one. They are younger looking. It's not that whole aging has been stopped. It's slowing down of the process. The lifespan was affected, a bit smaller, but a lot of youthful or health characteristics were maintained. So after that, about 10 master theses and 5 PhD theses were done in the lab to work out all the molecular pathways. Okay, what happens to heat shock protein? What is this? Whatever we could measure. Then this is the example of the same kind of a mild heat shock improving angiogenesis in endothelial cells. Severe stress won't do that. Even the upper experiment, if I do with the optimal stress which we use for basic research on heat shock, which is 42.5 or 43, that won't happen. Cells will take a couple of times and then they will die actually because it becomes very stressful. Same thing about angiogenesis. Then we came to this example of food components, curcumin in turmeric. There is so much research on curcumin as anti-cancer and whatever things as anti, but here is pro for improving the wound healing capacity of cells. In the cell culture assay, very simple assay where you make a scratch and how much time it takes. So at low level, curcumin is improving cell migration and wound healing, but at high level, it will inhibit it. So typical biphasic hormetic doses. More, intermittent fasting. There is so much data in the field of aging research that calorie restriction and fasting has so-called health promotory and longevity promoting effects. We showed it on human cells the same way, that if I give cells no food for once a week only, 1 day out of 7 days, they get no serum, for example, and they activate their lysosomal pathway, and they live longer and they live better. Again, this has been repeated recently at various other conditions, and the same thing true, that intermittent fasting, once a week fasting of human cells in culture also improves their lifespan. This is the most recent and unpublished data done by one of the visiting students, that if given hydrocortisol, the stress hormone also has biphasic response here, that up to 1 micromolar, it is actually stimulating the mitochondrial activity. And wound healing, the same story. At low level, hydrocortisone actually promotes wound healing. Then at higher level, we always talk about stress hormone as the bad, but again, biphasic dose response. Why all these things happen? This is where the molecular biology of hormesis comes in from our point of view. That there are major stress pathways. These can be used for discovering new hormetins. Now, hormetin, as I already defined, any condition which induces hormesis. Physical hormetins like exercise, radiation, high temperature, these are physical hormetins. Mental hormetins like challenging your brain, playing Sudoku. Nutritional hormetins, a lot of things in the food which we eat, they are good because they are bad. All spices fall under that category. What's good about spices in biochemical terms? Nothing. They are all causing challenge to the system. Even curcumin, that's the biggest hormetin. It causes oxidative damage in the cell. That is when NRF2 pathway gets activated. Whenever you look at something which people call antioxidants, antioxidant may be the end result. Starting point may be pro-oxidative, and that's what we define the hormetin as. So these are 7 major pathways in the cell, depending upon the nature of the stressor. If you are giving something which induces heat shock response, what can happen? And unfolded protein response and autophagy. Autophagy was the response for basically the starving or the food deprivation. So a couple of years ago, I presented this protocol for how to discover new hormetins or drugs for health. Normally, we have drugs against something, and that is the traditional approach, which has worked for where you know the clear culprit, the enemy. So then you need something against it. Aging needs approach how to maintain health. Aging is not trying to be anti-aging, but to maintain health. And there also you need drugs, but drugs for health. That's why the title of my talk today, Drugs hormetins as drugs for healthy aging. So this is one protocol that if you want to test a new material, then either first of all, start with the normal human cells in culture. And there are so many different types of cell culture systems available. Then depending upon, you should measure various stress responses. First the early response, late response, and then you can select and narrow down. Actually, based on this protocol, this was the case study I presented 6 years ago, the last time I came to this conference, a development, testing and development of a anti-aging cosmetic product. Somehow the cosmetic industry was one of the first ones to apply it. And a product called from LVMH, this French company, they were able to take it through hormetic analysis and come out publicly saying this is a hormetin. This is what causes a little bit of damage to your skin and you will get benefits. So that case study was presented here. So this I have already mentioned actually. This is the way to now categorize hormetins: physical, nutritional, psychological. Actually, one can even add biological hormetins because low-level infections are also having a lot of hormetic beneficial effects. This group in Jena, who have about 20 PhDs going on various kinds of immunological challenges and biological infections, viruses, bacteria. So now the important thing is that in order to study these stress responses, we need to create the stress profiles. That's one way to define health. A stress response profile is an important component of homeodynamics, and that can be studied by understanding how cells respond to different stresses. Now, usually in science, we take one stress at a time, like you take heat shock, what happens to heat shock, kinetics of and appearance and disappearance of heat shock proteins, and that's it. Or you take, say, starvation, what happens to autophagy. But what we really need is a combination of total profiles. Because when you give one stress, 6 other pathways also respond. And this was our theoretical curves we presented about 4 years ago, that if you do heat shock, and then what happens to other 6 ones? And that will tell me what is a healthy young cell and what is a healthy old cell. Then a PhD study was completed just last year, and that's where we got the real results that actually, yes, you can measure all the 7 pathways simultaneously, but they were not following our theoretical predictions. There were some of the pathways which were actually inhibited at the same time. So heat shock will improve heat shock response, but it will suppress maybe the DNA damage response, or well, I can't see all the details here, but the important point here is that we can take stress response pathways at molecular level in order to select or screen new potential hormetins. But what we need to do is all the pathways together as a total profile, because that will define what is the best homeodynamic space characteristics of that particular cell type. So finally, the challenges for developing drugs for health, first of all, is the change in the paradigm. We have to also communicate to the public that instead of anti-aging, we have to talk about pro-health, from disease-oriented to health-oriented, and from large and immediate effects. That's what most of the drug research is, 3-fold, 5-fold effects, because they are all working on inhibitions. It's easy to kill the system, always. It's very, very difficult to improve the system, and that's where hormesis comes in picture. Hormesis is always between 10 to 30% stimulation at any time, and that is why it has to be done again and again. You get benefits of exercise every time you do it, but it's not one round of exercise which is going to keep you alive forever. So you have to repeat it. So first is this approach, that if we want to deal with healthy aging and longevity, we have to change our way of thinking from anti to pro-health, from not looking for dramatic, huge effects in one step, but small cumulative effects which will be amplified and you get benefits. Exercise is the biggest paradigm for, or the best paradigm for hormesis, and nobody challenges the effects of exercise which are global or holistic. I do exercise of the leg muscles, but my mood gets improved, my immunology gets improved, my all memory gets improved. This is the holistic examples of hormesis. The second part of the challenge is measuring markers of health. That how do I know if I have a young healthy cell and an old healthy cell? We have no actually comparison of two healthy states at different ages. In the absence of using any language of diseases, I hate to use the language of disease, and I don't also talk about interventions from disease treatment or prevention to maintain health, which is needed to be done right now. But how do we measure health at molecular level, at cellular level, at physiological level, mental level? All these things, these are very, very important issues which we are still struggling with, and maybe some of the answers might come during this meeting even. So the third challenge is establishing protocols for single and multiple hormetins, because nobody is exposed to a single stress. We are all exposed to multiple stressors and stresses on the same day. Depending upon our own physiological and mental state, the same stress might be good or bad. And that's one of the very, very difficult questions, how to apply hormesis for health maintenance in terms of multiple stressors, multiple systems in the body, the number of repetitions, the recovery period, and all that. And a lot of us are working on these areas, and I hope that in one of the future conferences here, we might be able to give you more precise answers. But hormetins as drugs for healthy aging is a very, very promising approach to which I have put all my money and my rest of my career. Thank you very much. You said aging as the ultimate hormetin, because it's now life is the ultimate hormetin. Life is creating continuous challenge, and that is what is evolution worked for. But there is still, if it has reached a certain kind of plateau, there will be no further stress responses. So there is a lot of buffer left. So when we respond extra, heat shock proteins are being made all the time, yeah, as a part of life. But when you give a little bit of extra stress, the system is still able to make it. So life itself is hormetin. And we need to learn what are the lifestyle factors, including these external, to incorporate as hormetins. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Outstanding presentation.
So nice of you.
What would happen if we are exposed to a stressor when the homeodynamic space is being disrupted as a result of aging?
Yes.
But if you could comment.
Yeah, there are what we call the diminishing benefit kind of relationship. Studies done by us with Drosophila, and people have done with C. elegans, etc., that stressor, the best hormetic effects are achieved somewhere before essential lifespan. Yeah. But if the aging process has started, you do get benefits, but the returns are relatively lesser. And at some because again, the question is, it has to be mild stress. The definition of mild for every system has to be defined all the time, because it's a dynamic process. So suddenly we cannot expose. Yes, old people do respond to exercise. Even 75 plus and 80, there are a lot of data coming out on that. They also get benefits of exercise even in this extreme old age, but those are relatively less quantitatively. So we have to adjust for all those dynamic levels.
Suresh, nice talk. You imply that you have 7 pathways.
Yes.
There are hormetins that are specifically pathway, and you would like to have exposure to 7 hormetins that stimulate all 7 pathways. But how do you know it's limited to 7 pathways, and how do you discern which hormetins affect which pathway?
Well, that is the way to screen. Yeah, like when I start with a new test compound, whether it's synthetic or it's a natural plant, EU has given a huge grant for testing these kind of things on the basis of C. elegans. They are going to test 10,000 compounds. So you put a compound for testing and you study all the pathways, which are the immediate responses. Yeah, that's the first screening step, that if anything induces a cell or an organism to respond by one or more stress pathways, that at least gives you the idea that this is potentially hormetic. Then you have to test everything else as I explained.
Wouldn't it be nice to find one stimulus that actually can trigger all 7 pathways? I mean, maybe that's the fountain of youth.
Yeah. No, but as we showed with our latest PhD work, that when the cell is expending energy and resources on one specific pathway, some others are being inhibited also. To stimulate all of them together might be so costly for okay, theoretically, maybe we can work out the titrations, that what kind of stuff. Like in heat shock research, we have shown that if you induce the heat shock response to 100%, yeah, that cells die after 1 or 2. So the response should not be more than 30%, and that comes up again and again with different pathways, whether it's autophagic or other thing. So response should be 30% of the maximal, and then the next round of stress should be given after that response has come back to around 5% of the basal level or to the basal. So these combinations are possible to answer the question you asked me, but that requires a lot of scientists to be committed in this area, that applying hormetic. But whether we will have an ideal multi-hormetin pill, one for each specific pathway, yeah, that was the commercial way of selling the idea to people who can, that you will have like vitamins, we will have multi-hormetins, one for the autophagy, one for heat shock, one for this and that. But I won't go into that path in this scientific gathering. That's okay for public.
For the sake of time, unfortunately, we have to limit our questions to 3. I want to keep the program on schedule. Well, thank Suresh very, very much for one talk.
Thank you.